So the build-up for the Switch 2 has been kind of strange already, mostly because information has gotten out there, been bouncing around, some stuff with Nintendo even adding stuff to store pages, removing it, and of course we have just information in general around pricing being all over the place, very much scattered. However, there's also been the question around some of the games, the cartridges, the physical media that Nintendo is releasing for the platform. And one company has now made a statement that, to me, has raised a ton of questions around how things are going to go when it comes to the cartridges and the releases for Nintendo's next generation system. I wanted to go over that with you guys here today. So if you enjoy this video, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're new. To start, a quick overview of some of the cartridges we know about now through different previews or different press releases. Game key cartridge, of course, those are the ones where there's nothing on the cart. When you pop it into your system, it then downloads the data. That game cart acts as a key, as it's called, game key, so that it's unique and can allow you to play your game and then also resell it. So it is better than the code in the box, since that would tie digitally to your account and it was a one-time use thing. Technically, the game key cart you can hand to someone else or trade in or sell. Third parties seem to be using these quite a bit. Street Fighter 6, as an example, is using the game key, but Cyberpunk 2077 is not. So I'm not sure if there are backroom deals or something going on where Nintendo maybe helps out CD Projekt, for example, with Cyberpunk. But there are some other examples we'll get to here. One in particular of a 64GB cartridge being used where it really doesn't make a lot of sense. First-party games, though, are just using standard cartridges. Mario Kart World, even at 24GB, not using a game key. Go figure, it's also $80. Now, the Switch 2 edition games, those have been all over the place, like mixed messaging like crazy. Remember, at first, we were unsure if it was just a regular Switch cart in the box with a code, maybe where, the manual would normally go, but based on multiple explanations from Nintendo, and that also includes a quote from a spokesperson, it is indeed a cartridge with everything on it, including the enhancements. So I figure you're going to say, buy Tears of the Kingdom, we'll say Switch 2 edition, and you open it up and it's a red cartridge that's ready to go with no big download through a code or something. Keep in mind, though, Tears of the Kingdom is then $80 because, of course, the prices for Nintendo's games don't fall, and you slap another 10 on top, and boom, there you go, $80. And it also hasn't helped the case for Nintendo when it comes to something like Breath of the Wild, which the prices on that have not gone down. So $60 plus $20 on the DLC, and then $10 for the upgrade. You do technically get to that coveted $90 game that you see in headlines all over the place. We also have to remember that these cartridges are different physically. Now, this was an image that came out of that Switch 2 event with Welcome Tour, and at one point in time they decided to go over the differences on the back of these cartridges. They have like a regular Switch cartridge and then a Switch 2 cartridge right next to each other. The Switch 2 cart has this notch sort of on the bottom right when you have it flipped over, and that was specifically pointed out, which we can only assume until, of course, we get these games in front of us and try them out, is that notch stops, say, the red Switch 2 cartridge from going into the Switch 1. And to me, that makes a ton of sense, except now something else has come out from a developer that kind of throws all of this out of whack now, and that's Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma, which is a very unlikely source to cause this kind of confusion. But they put out a statement just detailing their release for the Switch 2, which seems pretty standard. But then as you go through it, it gets very odd. So not only is this on a 64GB cartridge, they really wanted to say that, which Cyberpunk 2077 Ultimate Edition, that they also really wanted to tell us, hey, this is a 64GB cartridge. I guess that's just going to be part of the messaging or marketing. Like, hey, we are going all out when it comes to the expenses to make sure you have the entire game here. But according to Marvelous, this Guardians of Azuma game is also going to work in a Switch 1 system. So it's almost this hybrid cartridge. They do point out the fact that it's a red cartridge. So now I wonder if that notch on the cart isn't necessarily to stop it from going into a Switch 1, but to in some way communicate maybe to the system which device it's in. That's kind of all I can figure, unless there are two different types of red cartridges you can use that doesn't have that notch. So this would kind of be like, people are comparing it to smart delivery, say, for Microsoft with the Xbox. I would actually compare it more to back in the day when we had those Game Boy cartridges that would tell the system, is this, or the game communicate to the system, is this in a Game Boy or a Game Boy Color, like Link's Awakening DX as an example, when you get the black cartridge for that one, and it had some extra dungeons or content or something that relied on the color aspect of the Game Boy. That's kind of what I would relate it to, because everything's on the cartridge, so it doesn't have to call to a server if, say, it detects that it's in an Xbox Series X versus an Xbox One, and then download patches or a good chunk of the game. They did say that there will, of course, still be patches that would contain fixes for the game on day one, but it was mentioned that everything was indeed on the cart, so just all the files, and then some way to tell which ones exactly you need. The thing that's so weird about this is Rune Factory has never been a large game in terms of file size. Like Rune Factory 5, as an example, comes in under 7 gigabytes after downloading the update files. I think before that, it's just under 5 gigabytes. So I'm not really sure why they would have to use a 64 gigabyte cartridge and say, couldn't use an 8 gigabyte or even a 16 gigabyte cartridge. Maybe if they had to put 2 different versions of the game, worst case scenario, they double up. Even then, you feel like the 16 gig cartridge would make sense from the money side of things. But let's face it, these are companies, publishers. That's what they're thinking of first and foremost. However, this technically works to back up a rumor that was making the rounds about a week or so ago, and it sounded really weird, but seeing this statement from Marvelous, it kind of makes sense now. So this was going around about limited cartridge sizes for the Switch 2, and it was shared in a video by Physical Paradise that was picked up by different websites and Reddit after they transcribed it. The idea really was there's a 64 gigabyte cartridge and there's a very small cartridge in terms of size. So you have 2 capacities minus the game key, which let's face it, the game key could be 256 megabytes on the high end, and all it's really doing is holding some kind of unique code to tell the system that you do own the game and are allowed to download all of it, essentially. But in this sense, let's say that there is we'll even say an 8 gigabyte and a 64 gigabyte, although even then, Rune Factory, I feel like, would use that 8 gigabyte. So it's hard to say exactly how small, like the smallest one is right now, as they mostly were pretty obscure about that. But basically, there's a large gap between the very small one and the 64 gigabyte cartridge, which at this point, I can only imagine that's really it, because otherwise, 16 gigabyte, a 32 gigabyte, either one you feel like would just be cheaper. And it's kind of comparable, I guess, to last generation, well, the current one with the Switch, before the Switch 2 comes out, where there was a 32 gigabyte cartridge and it was used very sparingly, like The Witcher 3 as an example. Used 32 gigabyte cartridge. I think there were maybe 3 or 4 in the entire generation that ever used them. So now all of a sudden we're seeing 64 gigabyte cartridges, and I guess if this Rune Factory game works on the Switch 1 as they're saying, that would then technically be the first 64 gigabyte cartridge for the Switch 1. So that's an interesting anecdote, I guess, there, that what's that come out June 5th on launch? There you go. The Switch 1 will have gotten its first 64 gigabyte cartridge. It does make me wonder, though, if this hybrid cartridge would be just different and usable for something like this, as opposed to a game key, which doesn't, I guess, work on the Switch 1, although we technically don't know yet. I assume it doesn't. So maybe that's why there's a hybrid one versus one with the notch, potentially, and the game key that way doesn't fit in the Switch 1, but say this Rune Factory game will, because it is, of course, designed to already have the data right there on their cartridge. It's a very strange position if this is all correct, and again, just based on Marvelous' statement, which sort of tied everything together, kind of feels like it is. Because if you're a third party, let's say it is an 8 gigabyte cartridge. If you can't get your game on there, that 64 gigabyte cartridge is quite expensive, is what's being said right now. So I don't know why you wouldn't just use a game key, and that kind of makes sense while we're starting to see that banner pop up all over the place. But then I go, okay, well, why is Rune Factory using a 64 gigabyte cartridge? That's what I mean. This is a very strange situation that seems to keep updating day by day. I will say, though, just based on a lot of the information and the timeline we have here over the last couple of weeks, I am quite interested in these Switch 2 cartridges. So I think I have some plans around maybe some videos we can do when the Switch 2 becomes available. And yeah, that means I'll probably be picking up quite a few games just to see what we come up with here. But let me know what you guys think about this down below in the comments. I think I'm to the point now where when the system comes out along with these games, I'm going to have to pick a few of these, get them and we just kind of cut open the cartridge and take a look at the different chips that are in there when it comes to the, I guess, the storage capacity of them, how it's working with game keys, switch to enhanced games, or just larger titles that we already know about like Rune Factory or Cyberpunk. And it's going to be quite interesting to see how all of that exactly works. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.